I take a moment to just welcome Mr. Sam McLean from SITFA, who will be observing today's meeting, and can I also welcome Councillor Sarah Cross to the committee. I think this is the first time she's attended this particular committee. Please note that the public section of the meeting will be recorded and published online for public access after the meeting. Can I ask that all attendees switch off their camera and mute their microphone when not speaking? The camera and microphone should only be switched on when you are invited to speak. Guidance on how to do this is contained within the guidance which has been issued to you. I'll now ask Mrs. Finch to advise of the members participating today, and for all members to confirm their attendance once their name has been announced by Mrs. Finch, so that it is clear in the recording of the meeting and can be recorded by her in the minute. Over to you, Mrs. Finch.
Thank you, Convener. Convener.
Present.
Councillor Yule, Vice Convener.
Present.
Councillor Allard.
Good afternoon. Present.
Councillor Cross.
Present.
Councillor Duncan.
Present.
Councillor Malik.
Present.
Councillor Mackenzie.
Present.
Councillor Cook.
Present, subbing for Councillor Many.
And Councillor Reynolds. I can't see him on the list. No. Okay, I'll keep trying to get Councillor Reynolds, Convener.
Okay, thank you very much. I was, before we start the actual papers, I did previously intimate to the committee that the service update for UTG Granite Reconciliation, I would give members an opportunity to ask questions on it. So I propose to take that before we begin item 8. Can we all agree that? Not seeing anybody disagree.
Convener, I think it would be best. Think it would be best, Convener, if I again withdrew during that discussion. I didn't declare an interest at the start of the meeting because you hadn't got that far on the agenda. So I will leave when you get there, and if Mrs. Finch or one of her colleagues would be kind enough to phone me or text me to let me know if it's safe to come back in, I will do so.
That sounds like a plan to me. Okay. Anybody else? I'm not seeing anybody else. Okay. Agenda item 1.1, notification of urgent business. There is none. Item 2.1, determination of exempt business. We have item 9.1 on the agenda, which is the Marchburn Park paper. Can we agree to take that as exempt business?
Agreed.
Yeah.
Thank you. Item 3.1, declarations of interest. We've already heard from Councillor Yule. Are there any other declarations of interest? Not seeing any hands. Agenda item 4.1, deputations. There are none. Agenda item 5.1, the minute of the meeting of the 29th of September 2021. I'll take it by each page. If anyone has any questions, if you could indicate or speak out. Page 7. Not seeing anything. Page 8. Not seeing anything. Page 9. Not seeing anyone. Page 10. Page 11. Page 12. Page 13. Page 14. And page 15. I'm not seeing any hands. Can we agree the minute of the 29th of September? I'm not hearing anyone. Can we agree it?
Yes, agreed.
Thank you. Okay, item 6.1, the committee business planner. It's in as the additional circulation, but I see we're actually going to be discussing some of it further on, but I'll take any questions anyone wishes to raise just now. Are there any questions on 6.1 just now? I'm not seeing any hands. Moving on, item 7, notices of motion. There are none, which takes us to item 8.1, and I'll give Councillor Yule an opportunity to leave, and we will let Mr. Wilson perhaps come in and tell us a little bit about the service update, please.
Thank you, Convener. As everybody be aware, we had an instruction to go away and or an offer from myself to go away and we'd carry out reconciliation and principally of the granite. This is what we've put together, which basically collates what we believe to be all this granite, which is currently off-site, stored in various facilities, and we've simply presented that for information at this point in time, on the understanding that once the project is complete, we'll then carry out a final reconciliation as already intimated in the earlier report.
Thank you very much. Questions for Mr. Wilson? Councillor Allard.
Yes, good afternoon, and thank you very much for the update. Very much appreciated. I just wanted to ask, in the photos that we have, and there are a lot of photos, there seems to be a repetition of some of the numbers. Just wanted to have an explanation on that.
So, sorry, I just didn't catch that, Councillor.
On the photos, and there are a lot of photos on the update, there seems to be a repetition of the numbers we can see on the palette. So could you maybe give us some explanation on this?
There shouldn't be a repetition of the numbers of the pallets. The pallets should be individually numbered. If there is a mistake in the photographs, then we'll correct that, Councillor.
It'd be good to check, because some of the numbers of the stones as well, they don't seem to add up. And something else I wanted to ask as well is, has the storm had any effect on all that stock of the granite?
Has the
Storm?
No, the storm hasn't had any impact on the granite I'm aware of. But we'll certainly carry out a check on the number to make sure that's correct.
Please, thank you.
Yeah. If I can maybe come back on that one, Mr. Wilson. I think I also noticed there's paint numbers on some of the pallets, but there's also white tag numbers allocated to them, and I saw at least 2 43s, but I'm not sure if the painted number on the pallet is meant to mean something or not. Yeah.
Thank you, Convener. We carried out our own reconciliation. We put out our own tag numbers. These are the numbers as on the little tags beside each pallet, where we've done our own remeasurement to make sure that we are content with the actual quantities that are there.
Okay. Any other questions for Mr. Wilson? I'm not seeing any other hands. I've got one other question. I think you've been quite clear that we're going to see a further report coming back. My query was, will that include the original inventory set against where the various items went, or how's it going to be presented?
The simple answer to that, Convener, is yes.
Yeah.
The honest answer is we have already done a, let's say, an intimated or initial quantification of all of that. I haven't simply included that into the report because it serves no real purpose at this point in time. But be assured we have that and we have those numbers ready, which we could share at any time. But yes is the simple answer. Okay.
Obviously we were looking to take it back once the building work was actually finished at UTG, because I presume we could have a pedestal or something damaged that needs replaced. Yes. These things happen. Would we hope to come back by, say, the 30th of June meeting? I'm just thinking for adding it to the business planner.
Yeah, I think you'd be safe in doing that, convener. I mean, I've always intimated the practical completion for the UTG is spring, but with regard to the granite, as soon as I feel that I'm in a point that I could quantify all the granite, then I would hope to bring that back sooner if you're okay with that.
That would be absolutely excellent. So if we could maybe arrange, if officers could maybe arrange to put it on the business planner for the 30th of June, I think that would be helpful, because February is going to be far too tight. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it might be getting close. If the next available dates is the 30th of June, then it would be the 30th of June. If there's an interim in between those two dates, then depending on the work on site, obviously I may or may not be able to, but I think you're safe with the 30th of June.
Okay. Is anybody on the committee otherwise minded, or can we agree that we'll look to hopefully get that back on the 30th of June? I'm not seeing any hands, so I'll take it we're agreed on that. Yes. Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Wilson. Thank you very much. There doesn't seem to be any other questions for you. I'm not seeing any hands anyway. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, moving on, we'll go back to the main agenda. 8.1, the Audit, Risk and Scrutiny Committee Annual Effectiveness Report. I have Mr. Belford and Mrs. Finch, and Mr. White has appeared on my screen. So are you taking us through it, Mr. White?
No, it wasn't. It was just to say, obviously, we would need Councillor Yule to come back in.
I have sent him a message. Yeah, I've asked him to come back, but he's not appeared yet. Oh, he's here. Good, thank you.
The joys of Teams meetings. Thank you for that, Mr. White. Mr. Belford, do you want to take us through 8.1, please?
Thanks, convener. I think this is a familiar format in terms of the report that's before you. You'll have seen it at a number of the committees already, and forms part of our assurance framework. Clearly, the audit committee has been a busy committee this last period, and there's a lot of detail included in there. There's added assurance in terms of the extent to which there's been scrutiny, which I think the audit committee has relied on and benefited from, in terms of obviously the best value report that was presented to council earlier in the year, and an active period where we've seen some of the key features that the committee is often exercised about in relation to outstanding audit recommendations and so on, seen positive strides towards improving the numbers that are outstanding and moving towards target there. I think if there's anything else, Mrs. Finch and myself will try and answer any questions you have.
Okay, questions? Councillor Allard.
Thank you very much, convener, and I hope you can hear me better now. My question is regarding, it's a very good report, and it's more a question of not only in that committee, but maybe across the committees as well. When we looked at page 67.7 of the report, we see a lot of decisions which and updates which have all at 0%, 0%, particularly as is a number of reports where the committee has amended officer recommendations at 0. Now, first of all, I would like to know if it's something this committee always had, that there were no officer recommendations to be amended, and also that if, because we are very civil in this committee, like in other committees, if these amendments happen beforehand, it doesn't read very well, because it reads like there is a very little action done, when I know that there is a lot of things the convener and members will do to try to change some of the recommendation at one point or another before they set into stone. So it's twofold. It's onefold, as it's been always the case, and is it helpful in the future maybe to present a different way?
Mr. Belford, did you get all that?
Convener, I did get some of that in terms of just I think what Councillor Allard was looking at in terms of actually the relevance of the information that's there, and actually is it telling us what we want to know. I think the zeros that are included in terms of the number of items that are excuse me, that are not coming before the committee or not being referred into in the committee, for example, that are shown in the table, I think are part of the assurance that you're looking for low numbers. You're looking for zero to be in there in order to be confident that actually there is you're not looking for conflict. I think what you're looking for there is an understanding, and actually what the committee starts to do, and what I get from this is the sense of collaboration and actually like-mindedness in terms of, you know what, there's an awful lot that can be signed up to together, and actually the behaviour also in the committee itself, because some of those are about the behaviour of the committee members, is also positive, and it comes across, but it does come across as a very strange graph when you're, or not graph, sorry, table, when you're seeing zeros in that kind of context. So actually, what I'm looking at that, when I'm looking at that, I'm seeing that as a positive endorsement that actually you're getting the right information, but actually you're seeing and understanding the impact that's being had within the committee, and how well the committee is working together in terms of actually doing the work. I did miss, Councillor Allen, I missed your point about across all of the committees. There was maybe something that I've not covered in responding there.
No, thank you very much, Mr. Bedford. And you really explained it the way I'm seeing it too. A great collaboration at committee level with officers, just to make sure that recommendation. I agreed with everybody else, and we don't need to amend them at the end point. Nevertheless, as you said, it's a question of presentation. You know, it could be taken for something else of what it is. So I wonder if we could put some text, you know, attached to it in the future, and not only in this committee, but across the committee, to maybe reflect better and making sure that the reader will understand exactly what's happening at committee.
Convener, through yourself. Thank you. Yes, happy, excuse me, always happy to continue to develop these reports. I think each of the committees has found them helpful in their own right, and clearly there's an opportunity to continue to develop that. I'm happy to speak to Mr. Bell and the other staff involved in preparing all of these to say, look, where can we move forward and incorporate some of the thoughts of Councillor Allard, if that's okay, Convener.
Thank you very much. I would completely agree with that, Mr. Belford. I think that's a very good idea. I think we always have to be on our toes to change slightly as things do change in life. Any other questions? I have a hand up, but I can't see whose hand it is. It's against the 21. Is it Councillor Ewell? Councillor Ewell, please.
Thank you, Convener. I think Councillor Allard made an important point, but it reflects the way that this committee works compared to other council committees. Sadly, we're not short of political ding-dongs at council meetings and at other committee meetings, but one of the pleasure is perhaps the right word. One of the pleasures of this committee is that we work by and large as a team in fulfilling our role, which is the name is Audit, Risk and Scrutiny, and what we spend the meetings doing is in a positive way, I hope, challenging officers and scrutinising the performance of the council, and that's reflected in the fact we don't divide politically as a rule. I can't remember when we last did. I'm not sure if Councillor Reynolds is on the call yet or not, but he and I would both remember a time when this committee's predecessors were just another excuse for Barney, and that didn't serve the purpose of an Audit and Scrutiny Committee, and that's something which Ms. Scott, when she was still, I think, a director, recognised, and she got the committee trained. A number of members will remember that, I'm sure. And that training transformed how we worked as a committee, and I think they're much better for it. But I do think Councillor Allard's point is relevant, and perhaps the way to do it is, rather than amending the statistics that we gather, because those are, as I understand it, standard across all committees, is to include some more narrative, either in the introduction or elsewhere, about what the committee members do, meeting by meeting, in terms of, reviewing reports on internal audit and other reports, and challenging and seeking further information. But we're not here to have a rammy. We're here to satisfy ourselves on behalf of the council that the council is operating in a prudent way. Thanks, convener. You're muted, convener.
Councillor Malik, please. Thanks.
Thanks very much, convener. I do not agree with Councillor Yule at all. I think there is no political ding-dong in any other committees at all. Because I can give you one example. Education Operation Delivery Committee, 32 reports out of 35 went without any division. So it shows when we are working together, we are doing best for our city. I don't think it's a ding dong. And second one, criticizing Lord Provost Barney Crockett is not acceptable at all. Whatever happened, I wasn't councillor that time when he was actually the convener of the Audit and Risk Committee, but I believe he done a great job.
I'm sorry.
Convener, if I may.
When you go, Councillor Yule.
Yeah. Councillor, I believe, convener, that Councillor Malik may have misheard me. What I made reference to was having a Barney, as in an argument or a disagreement, not any reference to the Lord Provost, who is, of course, a former convener of one of this committee's predecessor. But I certainly, I did not mention the Lord Provost. I was referring to having a Barney, which is a colloquialism, I'm sure you will recall, convener.
That's correct, Councillor Yule, but sorry, convener, but Barney Crockett is the same man. He was a convener of the Audit and Risk Committee, and he's Lord Provost now. But is a different Barney Crockett or same?
Sorry, I'm going to draw a line under this, gentleman. At the end of the day, there was a colloquialism mentioned. I have no idea who was conveners back in the day. I know there's at least 2 members on this committee who have extensive memories and involvement as councillors going back over several decades. And, to be quite honest, I've no idea out with my time in the council who was actually conveners, but I would agree that the training that has happened in respect of this committee, I think we can all agree has been very helpful and has helped all elected members to focus on the duties of this committee, to actually look at how the council is operating and functioning, and to, where necessary, hold things to account and seek appropriate changes. Mr. Belford, do you wish to add anything to what you were saying earlier, or?
No, I would simply draw the committee's attention to the report itself, and actually feel it's an extremely positive report in terms of what the committee has done, how we've operated as a committee, and how it helps underline and instill a sense of confidence in our governance processes.
Okay.
Thank you, convener.
Okay, has anybody else got a question for Mr. Belford? I'm not seeing any hands. So the recommendations are on page 17. Can we agree the recommendations?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. Item 8.2, internal audit progress. Mr. Harvey, do you want to take us through?
Thank you, convener. Yes. Okay, so here we set out details of progress with internal audits work planned for the last and current financial years. As can be seen from the figures, and as we discussed extensively at the last committee meeting in relation to the business planner, we haven't yet reported as many audits as originally expected, and we haven't met the anticipated reporting dates that have been reflected in the planner. On top of delays in concluding recruitment exercises, we've had a substantial number of extended absences recently. I had planned for both of these resource impacts to have been resolved before now, but that hasn't been possible to achieve. Our new Chief Internal Auditor joins us in January, at which point we expect to have more capacity. We've also recently taken on additional auditors, but it's taking a bit of time to bring them up to speed with the work. Now, each individual auditor is assigned a portfolio of work, and as part of progressing the audit plan, they become temporary experts in those audited areas. It takes time and additional resource to reallocate and reschedule that work if they're unexpectedly absent, for example, which is why some of the reports we had anticipated providing you today haven't yet been concluded. Time is also required to obtain information from audited services and thereafter any explanations for any findings that we might have, and then to the recommendations in the final reports which need to be given due consideration. Because those services have been equally under pressure, it has not always been possible to progress and conclude the audits as originally set out. Now, as requested at your last meeting, I've outlined the impact of previous year's work on previous year's audit plans. As you can see from the table at 3.4 of the report on page 38 of your pack, it has been common practice to carry forward reports from one year to the next and to report it to the committee in subsequent periods or subsequent financial years. Now, our previous audit plans have always included an intention to report to committees in May or June the following year. That's because that's generally the point at which the Chief Internal Auditor's annual opinion on the internal control system is published to tie in with the deadlines for the annual accounts and so on. As you can see from the table, on average during each financial year, over the last few years, with the exception of the last one, we've reported around 26 audits. Now, typically our plans have included 25 audits for each year. So there is an impact from the carry forward. Last year we reported 15. This year I'm expecting, this year to date, we've reported 13 audits. Now, not all of them relate to the current financial year's plan, but we've still provided 13. So we're already ahead of the game compared to last year. I'm expecting to conclude 20 within the financial year and several more before the end of June to flesh out that annual opinion. It is still a shortfall from the 25 planned, and of course the others brought forward, as you can see in the table. A lot of the assumptions that we made in developing the plan haven't panned out. We're still very much feeling the impact of COVID on our ability and on the audited services ability to progress with audit work. Now, I do appreciate that delays in reporting to the committee impacts on the detailed assurance that you receive from our audit reports. But to date, that hasn't had an overall impact on my overall level of assurance that I provide to the council. My annual opinion has been based on the work carried out, which includes work in progress and previous year's work and various other sources of assurance, not just the reports that you see within the financial year. We are currently reviewing the potential impact of delays with concluding this year's work on next year's plan, which we're bringing to you in February for your consideration and agreement. The audits where I currently anticipate there to be an impact are highlighted in the appendix to this report. I'd be happy to take your comments and questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Harvey. If I can just perhaps start, I think we had a conversation at the last committee with Mr. Bell as well, and I think we were in agreement that we would maybe try and create a little bit of a breathing space for your team because of really matters that have been absolutely out with your control. And I think you've highlighted the need for auditors to be recruited, etc. I wonder if you could just give us an idea how short-staffed you have been. I'm thinking maybe more for the sort of newer members of the committee, just to give them a wee flavour, because obviously not everybody was party to that meeting, etc. Thank you.
Thank you, convener. So for the last 15 months, I've been the interim Chief Internal Auditor following the departure of the previous Chief Internal Auditor. That meant that the Senior Auditor position that I was formerly filling was vacant for a few months. The expectation was that the chief internal auditor position would be advertised and filled shortly thereafter, but that didn't take place. It's taken over a year for that to get to this stage, unfortunately, for various reasons. That meant that we then asked someone within the team to act up. They were in the position for 3 months and then they found another job. So we got someone else to act up, which of course left their positions vacant. We have filled those, but that's replacing very experienced members of the team with much more junior members of the team who are finding it more difficult to get up to speed. There's an awful lot to take on in terms of both the councils, the integration joint boards, the pension fund, understanding how they all work and all the different facets of those different activities. They're very good at what they do, and they've got the tools to do it, but it's taking them time to get to grips with all of that. So we do, or we will from January, have a full establishment once we get the new chief into post. Which should give us a lot more capacity to progress with the audit plans that we've set out for each of our partners. Again, it's very likely to take a bit of time for the new chief internal auditor to get to grips with everything that's going on. I will do my best to support him, as will the rest of the team. But that is still having an impact on the reporting dates that we've indicated to you.
Well, if I could just say, if you could pass on certainly my thanks to the whole team. I think your team has done an outstanding job, notwithstanding staff shortages. We've had COVID, remote working. Some of the audits would have been extremely difficult to carry out in these circumstances. And indeed, I think we've seen in some of the papers virtually impossible for some of them to be carried out because the services involved, you really need to be there on the front line with the staff. So you certainly have my thanks, and please pass that on to the team. Can I ask if any members of the committee have got any questions on this paper, please? I'm seeing a hand from Councillor Duncan and then Councillor Cook.
Yes, thank you, convener. And I'd also echo your comments of thanks to the staff in exceptionally difficult circumstances. I think we all appreciate just how difficult internal audit has been over the pandemic, and the pandemic added to staff shortages. It's probably a perfect storm here. My maths was never my strong point. My maths teacher was my only teacher that thought I was irredeemably stupid at school. So I probably got numbers wrong here. But it's looking like that we might be carrying forward again something between 15 and maybe 20 audits to next year, on top of 15 carried forward from last year. Oh, you're nodding. I obviously got my sums right. That's amazing. And I think it can be quite a demotivating factor for staff if the workload if the pile of work that you're probably not going to get to is just getting bigger and bigger. I'm aware that you're bringing your audit plan for the next financial year to this committee in February. What is the process for deciding that some of the lower risk and possibly some of even the medium risk audits just won't be carried forward? Because I think we've got to be realistic and pragmatic about the workload, and that means that we can have a bit more certainty that the business planner that we're considering every committee is actually going to be fulfilled for the year. But I just wondered what the process was for reassessing the list of audits that need to be done.
I think Mr. Belford is looking to jump in before you, Mr. Harvey. Mr. Belford?
Yes, convener. I thought it was helpful. I almost put my hand up to make this point before Councillor Duncan spoke. But I think in order to just reflect Aberdeen City Council's position, clearly Mr. Harvey's been working on that plan in terms of for 22-23, has already prepared a considerable amount of work and discussed that with the extended corporate management team. That discussion continues to be reviewed, and we are having those conversations about actually how does capacity get appropriately dealt with in terms of the carry forward audits, the lower value audits, perhaps the more nominal areas that could be considered. So we are having those conversations and those considerations in terms of trying to make recommendations to Mr. Harvey about how he structures that plan. I would stress that it is the internal audit plan as presented and determined, and if there are areas that he and his team feel have to be done, he has a requirement to report some of that. But clearly it's risk based. We've got an opinion on risk, and we would like to share that with him also. So there is a process before we get to February, that it's not just about the internal audit team bringing that together. There's work with CMT and ECMT in order to make sure this is structured in the most appropriate way.
Do you want to come back on that, Councillor Duncan, before I take in Mr. Harvey?
Yes, thank you, Convener. Thank you for that reply, Mr. Belford. I just wondered if there was some guidance that you would like from the committee this afternoon to help with your discussions. Is there a role for this committee to say, we do want you to prioritise, or we want you to deprioritise, we want you to take account of workload? Would that be necessary or helpful, or would that just be a hindrance?
Mr. Harvey? Or Mr. Belford, whichever.
Sorry, Convener. I think it's always helpful to hear what the committee would like to direct or advise, just in terms of the decisions. So if there was some information that would like to express, that we can take account of, and then apply that to the formal structures and the requirements, then happy to do that. I don't know if Mr. Harvey wants to add anything to that.
Sorry, before you come in, Mr. Harvey, sorry, we're cutting you off here. I think at the last committee, we did have a little discussion with Mr. Bell as well, if you recall, where we were actually speaking about perhaps trying to raise slightly less audits next year in order to clear our feet back a little bit. So I just wonder how those discussions have gone. You could maybe add that in, Mr. Harvey, in your answer. Thanks.
Thanks, Convener. Yeah, Mr. Belford's response was very comprehensive there, and much along the same lines as I was going to give to you. We have been having extended discussions with the extended corporate management team, with Mr. Bell, Mr. Belford, and various other chief officers in terms of the potential content of next year's plan and potential plans for the 2 years thereafter. What my intention has been is to set out a number of areas where we can audit over the next few years, which should then give us some flexibility to, with your permission, of course, to have a plan that is a bit more flexible in terms of timing and delivery, so that we can more effectively address the risks that are present at the time that we carry out the audits. We've been horizon scanning, we've been reviewing committee papers, previous audits, all the media inquiries, and all sorts of different sources of potential risks, the council's risk registers, and comparing that against the council's risk appetite as well, to work out where the key areas that should be audited are. Now, there's also a cyclical program of reviews that we need to do to touch base every few years to make sure that we're updating our understanding of the internal control system, how everything works and operates and interoperates. So it's important that we look at all these different areas across different parts of the council, different functions and different systems and processes. So all of these things, all these factors have to be taken into account. Of course, officers' opinions come into play there, and of course the Audit Committee, the Audit, Risk and Scrutiny Committee, has a very important input to that. I want to make sure that we're covering the areas that you feel are the critical risks to the council. To go back to the earlier question, absolutely, I am giving consideration to, is there anything that we can drop from those previous plans rather than carrying it forward endlessly? And I think there are a few where there are potentially lower risk, and I think we've got that in the appendix where we've got the risk categories. At least that was the intention. I'll have to recheck. So that gives an indication of certainly the ones that we've got highlighted in that appendix are the ones where we feel that either there is too much pressure on the audited services, or that these are slightly lower risk areas where we will not get around to it this year, but we will seek assurances from the relevant officers. And then we will make a decision as to whether we take them forward next year or not. But we'll be giving you all that feedback in February to show you how we've arrived at that decision and how we plan to deliver it over the next few years. In terms of going forwards, at the moment, we're planning based on having the same level of resource as we do a full establishment. We need to wait and see if that assumption pans out as well in terms of having the capacity to deliver the set of audits that we would like to do. But my plan is to factor the ones that we're highlighting in the appendix today into the plan for consideration, but we may indicate that we would be removing some of those if there isn't sufficient capacity.
Councillor Duncan, do you want to come back?
No, thank you, convener. I'll listen to the rest of the discussion. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I've got Councillor Cook followed by Councillor Allard.
Thank you, convener. Yeah, it's just a couple of minor points of clarification again on the whole resourcing issue. I think it's page 39 and paragraphs 3.9 and 3.10 of the report. 3.10 talks about the number of days of absences you've got. I think it says that equates to 10% below full complement. Am I right in thinking that 3.10 is just talking about sickness absences and doesn't take into account this bigger issue that you've got with vacancies? So actually, it's not 10% below full complement. The actual picture is worse than that, which is not blaming you for it. It is what it is, and it's just additional pressure. Am I right in reading that?
Thanks, Councillor Cook. Yes, that's correct. That is just down to the sickness absences that we've had this year. Thanks.
And then I had just one more, again, minor clarification question, which is on page, if I can find it, I think it's page 43. It's in the appendices. Oh yeah, this is it. Down the bottom of page 43, on the mental health and substance abuse audit, it's shown as red, but also shown as complete, and we've got it on the. If it's complete, should it be red?
Given the extent of the delay, given that it's a year beyond what you were expecting to have it, that's why I've highlighted it as red, but perhaps we need to look at the consistency of how we're presenting this. Thank you.
No, I think Councillor Cook's maybe frozen there. Councillor Allard, I'll take you in. If Councillor Cook needs to come back in, he can come back in.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, I just want to appreciate as well the amount of work that's been done in very difficult circumstances. And of course, as Councillor Cook said, I think vacancies are going to be not stopping after the pandemic. I think we're going to have that problem for years to come. And I will take Mr. Belford's invitation. In other circumstances, we would have talked a lot more those things, but of course we do understand what's happening. One on page 46, 10 of the report of the IT infrastructure resilience. I just wanted to make sure, and it's on high, so after your reassurances, I can see that that's going to be done as soon as you can, so I'm happy with that. The one I would really want reassurances is on the one which was planned for May 2021. It's page 45, 9 of the report. It's regarding the assurance that the management and reporting of ongoing capital projects is adequate, and particularly on the lesson learned. So I'm really concerned, making sure, and want some reassurance that all that will be out in February before we discuss our budget for next year, to make sure that officers will have all that in hand.
Thank you, Councillor. Through you, Convener. If we go at the capital project management one first, because that's the one I've got in front of me. Yes, the council's budget will be set, as far as I understand it, on the 7th of March. So assuming we make the February committee, this will be before you before that happens. Now, the fieldwork for this one is currently being reviewed by one of the senior auditors in the team, and the report is being drafted. So we do expect to have it issued to the service for comments next week, which should give us time to get it back and onto the agenda for February. In respect to the one on page 46, IT infrastructure resilience, we have asked some questions of the relevant service to obtain assurance over various areas, but responses and supporting records have been fairly slow to come through. I think they're under quite significant pressure there. We do expect to complete this pending receipt of that information before the end of the financial year, but due to committee deadlines, it might not be possible to do it for the February meeting. We will endeavour to do so, but that's why we've got it highlighted currently as reported anticipated June. But as I say, I fully expect to have this done and dusted before the end of March.
Thank you very much. Any further questions for Mr. Harvey? I'm not seeing any hands. Can we agree the recommendations on page 37?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. 8.3 internal audit recommendations, Mr. Harvey.
Thank you, convener. So we have 15 overdue actions included in our report today, and updates have been provided by lead officers in respect of each of them. There are 13 actions which have been concluded since your last meeting. In respect of the housing allocations audit on page 14, sorry, it's 14 of my pack. It's it's page, I don't have a page number on that. Page 70.
Page 70.
So we have had information through, but we're still reviewing it. There's quite big volume of documentation in respect of the updates to procedures. So we just want to check through those to make sure that they cover all of the relevant points. So we have had the updates. We're just working our way through it. Happy to take questions.
Thank you. Questions for Mr. Harvey? I'm not seeing any hands. I have a couple. It was page 64. We have significant overdue by more than 6 months. And one of the reports, we have 7 times extended. Sorry, it's page 66. Sorry, not 64. Page 66, we've 7 times extended the delay, if you like. Is there any way that we could perhaps have maybe just a line or two to explain why that number of delays have occurred? Because I'm guessing, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but that's internal audit going back to the service and saying chase up on this, and then it's either not happening or you're chasing up on something else and it's not happening. What is it's going on here? You know, is it somebody's gone off long-term sick and only they know the answer? I see Mr. Campbell has flagged his hand. Mr. Campbell, do you want to come in?
Yes, thanks, convener. Yeah, I'd agree that 7 delays isn't ideal. There have been a number of reasons why that's been the case, some of which has been engaging with other services to see if they wanted to come on board in terms of the solution that we're looking to find. Some have been caused by COVID. Some have been caused by trying to find that most advantageous route to market, and delays with Scotland Excel in getting that framework in place. The framework is now in place. It went live on the 29th of October. So we have a clear way forward that we're going now. The procurement business case for the cashless catering system was submitted this week for consideration at Demand Management Control Board on the 13th. So we have a plan in place, and I would like to think that this would be the last delay that you'll see against this recommendation.
Thank you very much for that, Mr. Campbell. That's really most helpful. Mr. Harvey, I wonder, do you want to comment on my question as to whether we can maybe have just a wee one line that it would maybe answer our concerns?
I'm not sure you're going to get a lot more than we've just had from Andy. That was certainly my understanding of the progress update, but I would be happy to go back and ask for more from the relevant service if that would help.
Well, I was thinking more of just a one line on the column, just to say what the reason is why we've had to go back that number of times. It might be helpful for the members who are looking at the papers, because I think there's another one that was 4 times, and I'm sure there's a valid reason, but it would perhaps save officer time for us chasing you up as to why you've had to go back that amount of times. Just a wee one-liner, maybe.
Certainly, yeah. This really just to give you an indication of where things have been delayed for an extended period, but we can certainly look at building that into the update.
Okay. Any further questions for Mr. Harvey? I'm not seeing any hands. The recommendations are on page 57. Can we agree the recommendation?
Agree.
Thank you very much indeed. Moving on, agenda item 8.4, again an internal audit report on licensing income. Over to you, Mr. Harvey.
Thanks, convener. So here we were looking at making sure that records in respect of licensing were accurate and income was complete. Generally, the process was working well with only minor exceptions. We made recommendations to update procedures to make them more comprehensive, to make sure that fees are subject to regular review where that's appropriate and required, to update the system to ensure it is compliant with data protection rules, and to implement reconciliations to make sure that licenses have only been issued if they have been paid for. Now, in respect of the data protection part of it, it's actually in common with many council systems. It might not be possible to delete data to ensure data protection compliance without affecting other parts of the system. Now, we've seen that in a lot of audits of various different systems across all of our partners. The service has agreed to review this with the supplier, and I think that's probably the best we can hope for in these circumstances, unless they get a new system. In respect of reconciliations, the service has highlighted that their workflow process reduces the risk of licenses being issued without payment, but they will implement regular sample checks rather than a full reconciliation. Happy to take your questions.
Thank you very much. Questions for Mr. Harvey, please. No, you've obviously provided a very full and comprehensive report there. Can we agree the recommendation?
Convener, Councillor Allard has indicated.
Councillor Allard, thanks.
Sorry, Convener, I always have a question. It's on page 87, 8 of the report, and on the reconciliation 2.61. I just want to have some reassurance that the recommendation is agreed in full, and I would have loved to have your views on that, because on the service response, it does say that they will do a sampling exercise more than a reconciliation of all licenses granted. Just wanted to have some reassurance.
Mr. Harvey.
Thank you, Councillor Allard. The service considered that a full reconciliation would be too onerous, and therefore they intend on doing a partial reconciliation of a sample of records each month. That provides a secondary check, which is an additional incentive for everyone to get it right in the first place, but it does fall short of the assurance that a full reconciliation would offer. That said, the service has said that it considers it almost impossible for licenses to be issued without having received payment because of the way that their workflow operates. Internal audit, however, we do consider that in the absence of full reconciliations, we can't be sure of that. But this is it's a service decision to balance up the risks and the rewards and the costs and benefits of undertaking these actions, and that's what they've determined in this case.
Thank you very much. Any further questions? Councillor Allard?
Yes, thank you, Convener. I just wanted to have some reassurances then that it will be looked after thereafter, just to make sure that the sampling is big enough, making sure that a systematic reconciliation is not done, but at least that what has been proposed will be adequate.
Thank you, Councillor. Through you, Convener. We will be asking those questions when the service confirms that that is in place.
Okay. I'm not seeing any more hands. In that case, can we agree the recommendation on page 77?
Agree.
Agreed.
Thank you very much. Item 8.5, mental health and substance abuse. Again, Mr. Harvey, thank you.
Thank you, Convener. So here we looked at care management records to obtain assurance that support arrangements and associated expenditure were adequately controlled. In general, that was the case, but we have highlighted that due to the pandemic, some care reviews hadn't been recorded within planned timescales, and reviews of higher cost and higher risk cases hadn't taken place or hadn't been recorded as having taken place in line with the Health and Social Care Partnership's normal governance arrangements. The service is satisfied that costs and care plans had been agreed at appropriate levels under emergency delegated authority, though they have acknowledged that that wasn't documented. They will be undertaking a review of the process to make sure that appropriate governance provisions are in place for the future, whatever that may hold.
Thank you very much. I had a question which was more to do with the approval by senior managers. Was there a reason given as to why this didn't get done by Teams or Zoom or some other remote meeting? Was that question ever asked?
I believe it was to do with the efficiency of the process. I think they trusted the relevant managers to get on with it and provide or continue providing the services as best they were able to do, without adding an extra layer of bureaucracy into it. Which, of course, what we were looking for was to make sure that if they wanted to remove such layers, that was appropriate in terms of their terms of reference, and it hadn't been updated there. So I don't think anyone's saying that anyone's taking decisions that were inappropriate. It's just that the delegated authority wasn't recorded in advance.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Any other questions for Mr. Harvey? Councillor Cook.
Thanks, Convener. It's just a minor one, really. It's the in terms of the record keeping. Thinking how to phrase this. If the paperwork related to a street trader's license isn't exactly up to date and perfect, it's probably not the end of the world. If the paperwork relating to a health and social care issue isn't there, it could have serious repercussions. So is that a fair characterization?
I would say so, Councillor. It's very important that these are documented. I think the issues were not so much that it wasn't documented. It's the detail and the activities being able to take place as a result of the restrictions and so on. We were expecting to see those authorizations, those checks, those care reviews having taken place, but they had been delayed for reasons that hadn't been recorded. I don't believe that. Well, when we looked at it, there was evidence of regular visits to people or contact with them. Perhaps not so many visits. Certainly, there's regular contact with the cared for individuals, and we were happy that was the case. It was the formal review stages that hadn't been documented. So
thanks for that.
I don't believe from our review of it that anyone was left without the care that they required.
Thanks for that assurance. That was my only question.
Thank you very much. Any other questions for Mr. Harvey? I'm not seeing any hands. The recommendations are on page 91. Can we agree the recommendations?
Agreed.
Thank you very much.
Agreed.
Item 8.6, internal audit, financial system interfaces and reconciliations. Quite a mouthful there. Do you want to take it first, Mr. Harvey?
Thank you, convener. Yeah, so effectively this was about the checks and balances in place to confirm the accuracy of information transferred in from elsewhere to the financial system. And generally we find these were in place and operating effectively. We did highlight that some of the procedures could be more comprehensive, and we also recommended that where changes are made to data between when it comes out of one system and goes into another, those are all recorded as having been reviewed and logged to provide us with assurance that manual adjustments are only being made where it's appropriate and necessary. That can be as simple as, you know, adding or taking out punctuation or something like that to make sure that it fits in. But we wanted to make sure that there was a log of all those changes, regardless of how minor they may have been, to make sure that the data matches up between all the different systems.
Thank you very much indeed. And any questions for Mr. Harvey on 8.6, please? Not seeing any questions, not seeing any hands. Can we agree the recommendations on page 103?
Yep.
Thank you very much indeed. 8.7, the annual accounts 2021-22 action plan and key dates. Has anyone got any questions on this one, please? Mr. Belford, do you want to take us through anything?
Convener, yeah, just 1 or 2 points just to make in terms of this report. This is a regular report. You've seen this before, and it's our planning tool to confirm, I suppose, our early close of the annual accounts and make sure that we proceed to report that appropriately. What you'll see in this report this year is the introduction of a new timeline relevant to the local government elections and us not having as many committees in the April-May period, which means that we fall back on what's required. And what's required is we will get the draft accounts in accordance with the timetable to our auditors at the appropriate time, which will be in May, following the completion of that. But the committee will actually receive draft and final accounts all together in the June committee, which is, and the reason I say that, it's going to be a bit peculiar, but the requirement is that we present to the committee the draft accounts before the end of August. That's the actual statutory requirement. Therefore, we have to present that, but there's little point in presenting that after the drafted final accounts, which have been audited, so they're going to end up being in the same committee at the end of June. So I just wanted to draw that to your attention. It's the first time that's going to have happened, but in order to meet our own timescales that we place on this, I think that was important just to say that out loud in case members hadn't actually spotted that there's a subtle difference there for this coming year. Happy to take questions though, convener.
Thank you very much, Mr. Belford. That's most helpful. I was actually going to be asking you about that, so just as well you flagged it. Councillor Yule, please.
Thanks, convener. It's in relation to the presentation of the draft and the final accounts, the meeting on the 30th of June. Obviously, at that point, it's likely that there won't just be some new members of the committee, but perhaps some new members of the committee who are also new councillors. And I wondered if any thought had been given as to whether those new councillors on the committee would require, I mean, I know that just the training arrangements are being put in place now, but specifically in relation to the approval of the annual accounts, whether there was any need for any specific training in advance of that meeting, and if so, would I be right in assuming that that would be dealt with in advance of that meeting?
Convener, that's a good question, very appropriate in terms of the timing of that. Absolutely. Clearly, the change of the council, the anticipation that there will be new members who will come on to this committee and many others. yes, there is a training requirement for you, and there are specific pieces of training that will need to be carried out. I'd expect to do, even if that's an introduction to the annual accounts and running people through the training that we've previously done to highlight what this is, the key elements are, what to look for, and so on, to be worked through, and that we'd be delivering that at the end of May, June time, ahead of the committee meeting and the publication of our papers.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That's most helpful. Any further questions for Mr. Belford on annual accounts? Councillor Cross.
Thank you, Convener. It was just in relation to page 118. It says 3.3.8 that it's 31st of October 2021. I just wondered if this was a typo. Excuse me. Sorry, I'm on page 118 at 3.3.8.
Sorry.
Says that the report date is 31st of October 2021. Should this read 2022?
It should read 2022, Convener. Apologies, Councillor. Thank you for picking that up. That is an error.
Thank you.
Thanks. Any further questions for Mr. Belford? I've got one hand showing, but no, it's gone off. No, it's gone off. It was Councillor Cross. Thank you for that. Okay, can we agree the recommendations on page 115?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Item 8.8, the use of investigatory powers quarterly report. Mrs. Anderson, do you want to take us through this, or?
Sure thing, I can do. Good afternoon, Councillor Nicholl and committee members. This is the usual RIPSA activity report that you receive on a quarterly basis, and this is the Q4 one. But what's different with this report this time is that committee members have the revised policy in front of them at Appendix A. Whilst nothing has changed in respect of RIPSA policy or practice, the revised policy really streamlines the existing protocol and procedure into the Council's own template, and really makes a statement that the Council has powers under both RIPSA and the Investigatory Powers Act, and that it will intend on using those powers when it has legal grounds to do so. Just wanted to update committee that we still need to finalise arrangements in respect of communications data, so no acquisition of communications data will take place until such time as those arrangements have been concluded. The operational procedure is signed off by the Chief Officer, governance and training is provided. And I'd just like to point out to members that there's a missing number 7 within the index in the policy. So just to note that this will be corrected before it's shared with members of staff.
Thank you very much. Councillor Yule, I've got your hand up first.
Thank you, Convener. I wondered, Convener, if Mrs. Anderson could expand a little bit on when it would be appropriate for the Council to acquire communications data. And I appreciate, obviously, it's the fact of the communication rather than the content. But in what sort of areas would that be an appropriate use of that power?
Certainly, through you, Convener. Councillor Yu, we used to have powers in relation to, or used to exercise those powers in relation to communications data back in 2005, and specifically, there's been an uptrend in use of it with trading standards officers in terms of online selling. So often, where you would see individuals selling items online, there's normally a phone number to call or an email address. So the communications data would permit officers, where it's considered necessary and proportionate to do so, to get the details of who that mobile phone number might be registered to.
Thank you, Mrs. Anderson. That now makes complete sense. Thank you very much.
Can I just come back on that point? I take it that would also be helpful where someone is holding themselves out to be a private individual, but the records probably show that they're actually a business, and that this is a full-time occupation for them. Would that be broadly correct?
Yes.
Thank you very much. I've got Councillor Cook, and then I've got a question of my own. Thanks.
Thanks, convener. Yeah, I've just got some questions around the whole area of training. There's a comment on page 124 about the fact that refresher training is in development. Do I read that as meaning we don't have refresher training at the moment, but we're just developing it, basically?
Sure, through yourself, convener. Yes and no, Councillor Cook. So at the moment, because we've had no RIPSA activity for quite a while, we have in the background been working on quite a lot of things. The new policy you'll have seen today. There is also a specific piece of work that we are putting together with our colleagues in Trading Standards, and we'll be running past the Investigatory Powers Commissioner about social media and investigations. So until we've clarified that and the governance process around that, we won't be rolling that part of the refresher training out to staff, and it was certainly a big ask from the authorising officers that the refresher training, which will be more of a practical model, focuses on that element.
Thanks, that's helpful. It just kind of struck me that if these are powers we're not using very often, if you've had initial training on something but you're not then doing it, it's probably more important to have refresher training. I'm thinking of two examples. One would be in IT, where there are some IT things that I do once in a blue moon, which is why I phone the IT help desk quite a lot. The other area would be, or the flip side would be in, say, planning, where you have initial training on planning, but then pretty much every report that you get on planning committee, the handling report will say X is a material planning consideration that you must take into account and Y isn't, and therefore you must ignore it in making your decision. So in that area, because you're kind of doing it all the time, there's perhaps less need for refresher training, although Mrs. Beattie might want to come in and say, why does Councillor Cook keep asking daft bloody questions at planning committee then? But yeah, it's kind of, I just think it's more important when you're not using something to keep the refresher training going.
Yeah, Councillor Nicol, if I don't mind me coming back to Councillor Cook on that. Yeah, it's a very good point, actually. And I'm very conscious that I haven't managed to roll it out thus far. And I think that the complexities around the social media process are something that I would like to make sure we get right. We've got a very good, successful track record with the Commissioner, and I'd like to keep it that way if possible. But also throughout the year, there have been updates that have gone on to the restricted online forum for both applicants and authorising offers. So it's not as though no element of awareness or training has happened. It's just that the hours practical module hasn't run just yet. And for those, also for committee's knowledge, that if there is any applications for surveillance and any good feedback that comes out of that, that does get cascaded to everybody that's been on the training.
Thanks, that's helpful. And by the way, no criticism intended. It was just kind of a suggestion that I thought might or might not have been helpful. And the other point I was going to make, but actually this is probably premature now, given what you've said. There is a brief reference to training in the new policy. I think it's in point 11. I just wondered if at some point it might be helpful just to expand on that a bit to say what's required. But that again, that's just an idea.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, that's me done.
Thank you. My question is actually, well, first of all, congratulations on the new policy. It's a huge piece of work. As somebody who used to live in that world, I fully understand the complexities and difficulties. It is a very, very complex area to perform in, and the difficulties of complying with all the rules are very much at the front of my mind. I did read, though, in the policy that we sort of link in with the National Anti-Fraud Network. Now, again, going back to a previous life, I do kind of know about some of these things. And I was a little bit surprised that that was our point of contact. And while on the one hand, I understand why local government going into what is primarily a local government focused organisation, but my concern there was that the anti-fraud network is primarily English law. And of course, RIPSA and the parts of the IPA that apply in Scotland have to comply with Scots law, which at times is very different. And the two systems at times do not have the same rules. And I really wondered whether it was perhaps more appropriate for our advisors to also seek assistance from Specialist Crime Division at Police Scotland. Used to be Serious and Organised Crime, back in the day, the Scottish Crime Squad, blah, blah, blah. I wondered if that was also either an alternative or one of the places you would maybe look to go if you were looking at particularly communications work, because there are quite substantial differences in the legal requirements, and no disrespect to our colleagues in England, they work in a very, very different paper trail environment. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm happy to come back to you on that point. As you say, in terms of NAF, and it's the recognised place to go in terms of Home Office accreditation for local authorities run by a local authority. And you're right, there are some nuances between English and Scots law. I think the way that I have been conscious of it to set it up, and certainly this has not been completed yet, is that the council's operational procedure would have checks and balances in place similar to the RIPSA one. So you will have a senior officer who has to essentially sign it off in the same way we would expect them to do for a covert surveillance application before it is submitted to NAFN, and NAFN are just really providing that special point of contact role, which is they're checking checks and balances as well before it goes off to the Home Office and the Office of Communications Data. I will take your point about maybe having a look elsewhere, but certainly that was something that was brought up by the Investigatory Powers Commissioner when they were here last year. I think it's last year. I forget. But they were specifically homing in on NAF and do we have any existing contractual relationships with them, because that would form part of their remit as well. So yes, there are some differences, but the governance arrangements that I intend to put in place will hopefully cover off any differences between the different pieces of legislation.
Yeah, it's just I know from experience back in the day in another life that in England people don't necessarily recognise we have a completely different legal system, and obviously a lot of the work you're doing potentially goes before the courts, and therefore it's kind of important that Scots law and an understanding of Scots law is there, and I'm absolutely sure our colleagues in Police Scotland would provide a link-in point with anything, you know, of a technical nature as well. It's just that in England, I've regularly come across former colleagues who just assume we do everything the way they do, and they don't understand that it's not done that way
Sure.
at all. But no, that's a great answer. Thank you very much indeed.
No problem.
Have we got any more questions for Mrs. Anderson? I'm not seeing any hands, so can we agree the recommendations on page 121, please?
Yep.
Yep.
Thank you very much indeed. And that, I think, takes us to the end of the public session. So if I could ask Mrs. Finch to perhaps end the recording, and